Hello, my friends! Welcome back to Chinese history and mythology. In the last episode, we saw that the struggle inside Zheng was no longer a simple fight between brothers for the throne. It had already been upgraded into a carefully planned operation to change the ruler. Here's roughly what happened. Duke Zhuang of Song first called Prince Tuto, meet him alone in a locked secret room, and laid everything on the table. Duke Zhou had already sent him a secret letter. In that letter, Duke Zhou begged him to act and promised, as long as you kill Prince Tu, Zheng will hand over 3 walled cities to Song Duke Zhuang, then put on a show, saying he really could not bring himself to do it, and threw the problem back into Prince Tu's lap. Prince Tu thought about it for a whole night. He understood very clearly that his life was already in Duke Zhuang's hands. He could only kneel and declare that as long as he could return to Zhong, stand again in front of his ancestors' spirit tablets, and take back his place, then whatever Duke Zhuang wanted, cities, gold and silver, grain and supplies, everything he had would be put on the table. After that, Duke Zhuang had Zheng's chief minister, Zhou, brought out from the armory where he had been locked up, and also summoned the Yang clan. The family of Prince Tu's mother, the key people, all sat down together at one table and swore a blood oath on the spot. They wrote the whole plan of abolishing Duke Xiao and setting up Prince Tu. In clear black and white, the conditions for helping him onto the throne were these. Zhong would give up 3 cities, send 100 pairs of fine white jade discs, send 10,000 yi of gold, and every year ship 30,000 zhong of grain to Song as a regular tribute. Once Prince Tu returned to Zhong as ruler, all real power in the government had to be placed in Zhu's hands. Zhu did not dare say no, and on top of that, married his daughter to Zhu of the Yang clan. Family ties were added to political ties, and these forces were tied tightly together into one rope. Then came the execution phase. Prince Tu and Zhu changed out of their noble clothes, dressed themselves like common traders in rough cloth, and hid inside Zhu's carriage convoy on the way back to Zhang as soon as Zhu returned. He pretended to be too sick to come to court. He invited the ministers to visit him at his own house, and had armored soldiers hidden in the hollow space inside the walls, ready to rush out at a signal. In front of the ministers, he first used one piece of news to crush them. Song was sending 600 war chariots to escort Prince to Beck and set him up as ruler in Zheng. Then he laid down what he said was the only way to make the Song army turn back. They had to voluntarily depose Duke Xiao and set up Prince Tu instead. Gao Qiumi, who had long been at odds with Duke Zhao, jumped out first to declare his support. The other ministers could see very clearly that the situation was already one-sided, and they could also hear the sound of weapons from behind the walls. No one dared stand up and say no. One by one, they could only follow along, kneel down, and accept Prince Tu as the new ruler. On Zhu's side, he had Prince to sit properly in the main seat in the hall, and change his title to Duke Li of Zheng, while at the same time he wrote a secret letter to Duke Zhao. In that letter, he admitted that he had been forced into this by Song, with his own life held over the fire, and had no choice but to help with the change of ruler. He also tried to persuade Duke Zhao to step back for now, to put survival first, and wait for a chance to rise again in the future. Duke Zhao knew that the situation was beyond saving. With tears in his eyes, he took leave of his wife, Lady Gui, and slipped out of Zhong in the night, fleeing to the state away to seek refuge. Duke Li formally took the throne in the capital, but real control of the state fell into the hands of Zhu and the Yang clan. Prince Wei and Prince Yi, who were also sons of Duke Zhuang, were not willing to accept either Duke Zhao or Duke Li. They were full of resentment and also feared that one day Duke Li would come to get rid of them. So each of them chose his own escape route. One ran away to the state of Kaidi, the other to the state of Chen. On the surface, it looked like a smooth succession and a stable new court. In Zhen, in reality, several dangerous lines of fire had already been planted outside its borders. Over in Song, Duke Zhuang heard that Prince Tu had successfully taken the throne in Zhang and was sitting firmly as ruler. Of course, he was delighted. He sent envoys with gifts to congratulate Duke Lian. At the same time, he quietly began to plan the next step, those 3 cities, the white jade and the gold, and the never-ending river of grain. How to collect slowly on this political investment would all unfold in the episodes to come. And that brings us to where we are today. Now we can move on and talk about how this political debt between Song and Xian turns into the next round of conflict. Prince Tu, with the support of the state of Song, returned to Zheng and took the throne as ruler in history. He is known as Duke Li of Zheng. He had barely warmed the seat when Duke Zhuang of Song sent envoys with a formal letter to his court. The content of that letter was very direct in plain terms. It was just 2 points. The first was congratulations. It said, Congratulations on finally returning home and becoming ruler of Zhen II. Went straight to the real issue. It reminded him that back when he was living under another man's roof in Song, it was Duke Zhuang of Song who sent troops to help him at that time. He had personally promised to give Song 3 walled cities, 100 pairs of fine white jade, 10,000 yi of gold, and every year 30,000 zhong of grain. Now that he was sitting on the throne, it was time to make good on his word. We can pause here and explain those numbers. 1 pair of white jade discs meant 2 pieces of perfect white jade. So 100 pairs meant 200 pieces of high-quality jade. 10,000 yi of gold was an enormous amount of bullion. For that time, 30,000 zhong of grain meant long lines of grain carts rolling out of Zhong and into Song every year, plus 3 entire cities. If you put this into modern terms, it would be like a newly appointed leader handing over 3 important cities and more than half of the national treasury to a neighboring state. When Duke Li received this letter, his heart sank. He immediately summoned his chief minister Zhou. To discuss it, the two of them sat facing each other in the palace, and Duke Li spoke first, very frankly. He said, "When I was in Song, I had nowhere else to go. I could only say yes to Duke Zhuang. Now the situation is different. I have just taken the throne. The state granaries are already nearly empty, and the people's hearts are not yet steady. If I hand over everything I promised all at once, the treasury will be drained in a moment. On top of that, I still have to cut off 3 cities. When the neighboring states hear about this, they will think Zhen is weak, poor, and foolish. A new ruler who has just taken the throne and immediately loses cities. Where is his face supposed to go?" Zhou knew that everything he said was true. He thought for a while and then offered a compromise. He said, "My lord, you can drag this out for a bit. You cannot refuse outright, but you also cannot agree to everything at once. We can write back and first apologize to Song, show respect, and then explain that Zhong has just changed rulers, and the people are still unsettled if we cut off territory now. There will be serious unrest. We can offer to give Song the tax revenue and levies from those 3 cities. On the books, instead of handing over the cities themselves, as for the jade and gold, we can first pay 1/3, and our tone must be very humble, full of thanks. As for the yearly 30,000 zhong of grain, we can accept that clause, but ask to start the shipments next year." Duke Li listened and felt that at least this plan let him breathe. He followed Zhu's proposal and wrote back to Duke Zhuang. In the reply, he said, "For now, we are sending 30 pairs of white jade and 3,000 yi of gold, and after the autumn harvest, we will hand over the tribute and taxes from the 3 cities." The envoy from Song brought this reply and the gifts back to Song and read the letter out loud to Duke Zhuang in the court. As soon as Duke Zhuang heard it, his face fell and anger rose straight to his chest. What he said was very harsh in essence. He said, "When Prince Tu was wandering outside his country, who rescued him? I did. I gave him a place to live and food to eat. I sent troops to escort him back, so he could sit on the throne today. The things he promised were never his personal property in the first place. They were, in name, the wealth and land of his elder brother Duke Zhou. He was using someone else's assets to make promises, which in fact was already a good deal for him, and now, when it is time to pay up, he becomes stingy and only hands over a small portion. What does he take me for?" After venting, he immediately sent out another group of envoys, this time with much harder words, and sent them again to Zheng. His attitude was far tougher than before. Duke Zhuang told his envoys very clearly, "Tell Duke Li of Zheng that everything he promised must be delivered in full, no discounts. The 3 cities must be ceded and cannot be swapped for tribute. The time limit must be short. He is not allowed to drag this out into next year or the year after." When Zheng received this second letter from Song, Duke Li once again called Zhu. The two of them sat down, went over the accounts in detail, and in the end, Zheng gritted its teeth and decided to send an extra 20,000 zhong of grain to Song, hoping to calm their anger with more grain. The envoys delivered this extra grain to Song, but when Duke Zhuang saw it, he was even angrier. He felt that Zhang was playing games, trying to use small gifts to buy time, so he sent envoys to Zhang for the 3rd time. This time, the tone was heavier and clearly carried a threat. On the court in Zheng, the envoy from Song repeated his ruler's words. In essence, he said, "If Zheng still refuses to deliver everything it promised in full, then let Zhu himself come to Song and explain it in person." Everyone in the Zheng court understood what lay behind that line. Last time Zhu had gone to Song, he had been locked in the armory and had almost lost his life. If he went again, he might never come back. When Zhu heard the envoy's message, he knew this was no longer a simple debt collection. Song wanted to use him again and perhaps hold him as a hostage. He said to Duke Li, "When our former ruler Duke Zhuang of Song was alive, he once did a great favor for Song. Zhong has never really repaid that favor. Now Duke Zhuang of Song leans on his merit and helping you to the throne and keeps coming back to demand more and more. Never satisfied, and speaks in such a bullying tone, we cannot obey him forever. If we keep backing down, he will only look down on us more. For the moment, Duke Li could not think of a better solution. He asked Zhou, "Then what do you think we should do now?" Zhou's idea was very clear. He suggested that Zheng should not try to carry this alone, but look for friends to help, he said. My lord can send envoys to Qi and Lu and ask those two rulers to speak on our behalf and mediate with Song. Duke Li hesitated and said, "Will Qi and Lu really be willing to help us?" Zhou laid out the logic, one step at a time, he said. A few years ago, when our late ruler was punishing Song, every time we went to war, Qi and Lu fought alongside us also. Duke Zhuang of Lu was able to sit firmly on his throne back then, largely because our late ruler helped him, even if Qi does not want to get involved. Lu could not pretend not to see. Duke Li then asked, "And what exactly do we ask them to do? We cannot just ask them to say a few nice words and call it done." Zhou said, "We can do it this way. When our late ruler was alive, there was a violent coup. In Song the Grand Steward, Huadu killed Duke Zhuang of Song and set up Prince Feng as the new ruler. That act was, by any standard, a crime of murdering one's lord and seizing the throne, but at that time, Song used heavy gifts to bribe other states. Lu accepted a sacrificial cauldron from Song, and we and Zheng accepted a bronze ritual vessel called Shangyi. It was because Qi, Lu, and Zheng all took bribes that we tacitly allowed that coup to stand." Here he paused and then went on. "Now we can tell the rulers of Qi and Lu that Zun is willing to return that bronze vessel Shangyi to Song, exactly as it was, and bring that old account back into the light. We ask Qi and Lu to present this story to Duke Zhuang of Song and remind him how he once relied on bribing other states and on killing his lord to take power in such a moment. Anyone with a conscience will feel his face burn a little, as long as he feels a little shame. There is a chance he will himself withdraw the harsh terms he is now demanding from Zheng." When Duke Li heard this, the worry on his face slowly eased. He let out a long breath and said, "Only after your explanation do I really see the whole picture, so we still have this card to play." He immediately sent out two groups of envoys, one to Lu and one to Kiev. Each group carried gifts. On one hand, they were to report the change of ruler in Zheng, and on the other, they were to complain about Duke Zhuang of Song's ingratitude and his repeated demands for payment. Let us look first at the group that went to Lu. When they arrived, they told Duke Zhuang of Lu the whole story from beginning to end. Then they presented their gifts and asked him to speak to Song on their behalf. After listening, Duke Zhuang could not help laughing. He said, "Back then, Duke Zhuang of Song bribed our state of Lu with just one cauldron, and that was enough for us to nod. Now Zhong has already given him so much, and he is still not satisfied. That is true greed. Since Zhong is in this difficulty, I will personally make a trip to Song and speak for you." Then he promised on the spot. He said, "I will go back and prepare, and in a few days I will go to Song myself. My face still has some value." The envoy from Zhen thanked him over and over, and for the moment, felt more at ease. On the other side, the envoy sent to Qi arrived there and met Duke Shi of Qi. He also told the story in detail, and asked Qi to help from the weight of the gifts. It was clear that Zhen was treating Qi with great respect. But Duke Shi's attitude was completely different. Duke Shi remembered Duke Zhao of Zheng very clearly in the old days. When they were dealing with the northern Rong tribes, it was Prince Hu, the later Duke Zhao, who provided the strategy and the troops that helped Qi win. After that victory, Duke Zhi had wanted to marry his second daughter Wen Jiang to Prince Hu, though the marriage had not gone through because Prince Hu himself had firmly refused. In Duke Zhi's heart, his sympathy had always been with Hu's side. So now, when he heard that Zheng had deposed Duke Zhao and put Prince Hu on the throne instead, he was displeased from the start. Once the envoy finished speaking, Duke Shi immediately asked, "What crime did Duke Hu commit? Why did you suddenly depose him? Is it really that hard to be ruler in Zheng? Do you truly change rulers today and replace them tomorrow?" These words were very direct and full of visible anger. Duke Shi went on. He said, "I do not feel at ease about this at all. I plan to personally lead several rulers to Zhen and ask clearly what has happened. I want to see with my own eyes who is pulling the strings behind all this." When the envoy from Zheng tried to offer the gifts he had brought, Duke Shi waved his hand and refused to accept them. His meaning could not have been clearer on the question of who should rule Zheng. His heart was with Duke Hu, not with Duke Li. The envoy could only return home empty-handed and report Duke Shi's attitude and words to Duke Li. When Duke Li heard this, his face turned pale. He said to Zhu, "If Duke Shi talks like this, He is clearly standing on Dooku's side. If he really comes in person and brings other lords to question us, is that not the same as coming to back Dooku? If they raise troops, what will we do? At this crucial moment, Zhou was the one who stayed calm. He said, "Since he has spoken like this, we might as well treat it as real. We should start preparing everything. We need order the troops to drill, have the craftsmen repair the chariots, gather bows, armor, and grain. If he truly leads troops against us, we will fight him. There is no way to hide from this, so the only thing we can do is prepare our strength in advance." While Zheng was busy preparing its forces, Duke Zhuang of Lu had already started to move. He first sent one of his kinsmen, Prince Zhou, to Song to confirm the time and place of a meeting. When Prince Zhou arrived in Song, he again explained Zheng's difficulty and passed on Duke Zhuang's wish to plead on Zheng's behalf. At the end, he suggested that the two rulers choose a place in between their states and talk face to face. Duke Zhuang of Song listened and outwardly was very polite. He said, "Since the ruler of Lu has sent you to set the time, of course our state must show respect. How could we make the ruler of Lu travel all the way to Song to see us? This time, it should be me who goes to meet him near Lu." Prince Zhou returned home with these words. Duke Zhuang then sent men back to fix the exact location. In the end, they chose a place midway between the two states called Fuzhang. The time was set for the 9th month of the 20th year of King Wan of Zhou. When the agreed date arrived, Duke Zhuang of Song and Duke Wan of Lu both came to Fuzhang on time. The armies of both states camped at a distance, and the two rulers met in a large pavilion tent set up between the camps. The formalities were all in order. They bowed to each other, exchanged greetings and polite phrases after the courtesies. Duke Wan slowly brought up the matter of Zheng. He first expressed thanks on Zheng's behalf. He said, Duke Li of Zan was able to return home and take the throne because Song sent troops to help. He does not dare forget that favor. I have come this time to thank your state for your help, and also to ask you to give Zhang some room to breathe. Zhang has just changed rulers and the granaries are temporarily empty. We hope your state can give him a little more time and first accept part of what was promised, then let him slowly make up the rest. Duke Zhuang listened, smiling on the surface, but his words were hard. He said, "The favor I did for Duke Li is not a small favor in my own words. He was like an egg that had not yet hatched. I was the mother hen who warmed him, kept him safe until he cracked the shell, and then gave him strong wings so he could fly back to Zheng and be ruler of the things he promised me. We listed out one by one in my own hand, and he swore before heaven." He paused and then added, "After going back, he used a usurper's method to drive out the original ruler and take the throne for himself. Since he has done that, how can he now go back on his sworn promise? That is something I find very hard to accept." Duke Wan could only continue to persuade him. He said, "How would Duke Li dare forget your favor? It is only that he has just ascended the throne, and the treasury really is empty, whatever he could take out. He has already sent a part of it. I hope you can be a little more lenient as long as you give him some time. Once his state is stable, he will certainly pay off the rest. Little by little on this point, I give you my word face to face. I am willing to stand as his guarantor." Duke Zhuang still refused to relax. He said, "When it comes to gold and jade, if you say the treasury cannot produce the full amount for now, I can barely listen to that. But the cession of 3 cities does not need to be saved up piece by piece. It only takes an order. Why is it that on this issue as well, he delays again and again?" Duke Wan had no choice but to repeat Jisu's line of reasoning. He said, "Duke Li is afraid of losing the land left by his ancestors if he cuts off 3 cities. All the neighboring states will laugh at him and call him timid and incompetent. That is why he suggested giving up the tax revenue of those 3 cities instead of the cities themselves, as far as I know. He has already sent more than 20,000 zhong of grain to your state in addition." Duke Zhuang immediately made his stance plain. He said, "Those 20,000 zhong of grain were a part of the yearly 30,000 that he already promised. They cannot be counted under the clause of the 3 cities, and besides, so far he has not even given half of what he promised. Now only a short time has passed and he is already delaying like this after a few more years. How can we expect him to still remember his oath? That is why I asked you to come help. I do not want you to speak only for Zheng. I want you to help us claim what is owed." Hearing this, Duke Wan was already very displeased in his heart. He felt that Duke Zhuang spoke endlessly of favor and gratitude on the one hand, yet on the other refused to yield an inch, and kept his eyes locked on those 3 cities and that pile of gold and jade buttons. They had already gone this far with the ceremony. He could not argue head-on any further. He could only force himself to stop and end the meeting with some vague and non-committal words. When Duke Wan of Lu came back from that meeting at Fuzhang and sat down again on his own throne, his mood was actually quite mixed. On one side, Duke Li of Zheng kept asking him for help on the other side. Duke Zhuang of Song refused to loosen his grip on those 3 cities and that pile of gold and jade. Back in his capital, the first thing Duke Zhuang did was call in his kinsman, Prince Zhou. He said to Prince Zhou, "Go to Zheng one more time and tell Duke Li exactly what Duke Zhuang's attitude is. Now tell him every word so he knows where things stand. If he still wants me to step in, he will have to think of some new way to move things." Prince Zhou accepted the order and set off again for Zheng when he arrived. He repeated Duke Zhuang's message, word for word, to Duke Li. As soon as Duke Li heard that song, still refused to give up anything. His face fell. He had known that Duke Zhuang would not let this go easily, but when it really came time to pay, it still felt unbearable. After listening, Duke Li's first move was to summon the grandee Yongzhu. Yongzhu was the son of the Yong clan. Duke Li's mother's family. Duke Li had been very close to that family when he was living in exile. In Songnan, Yongzhu was serving in Xin as a high official and enjoyed Duke Li's trust. Duke Li said to Yongzhu, "Duke Zhuang of Lu has already gone to Song once and spoke many good words for us, but Duke Zhuang has not stepped back at all. Now Song is still pressing us, asking for money, cities and goods. I really cannot produce that much. Do you think we need to offer something heavier and ask Duke Zhuang to plead for us one more time?" Yongzhu thought for a moment and said, "When our late ruler Duke Zhuang of Song helped Song back then, Song sent him a very important gift, that ritual of bronze called Shangyi. It was a treasure of the Song court. Why do we not return Shangyi to Song? Give it back as their own property. That will at least show our attitude." Duke Li felt that this was worth a try. He decided to send Shangyi first to Duke Zhuang of Lu and ask him to pass it on to Duke Zhuang of Song. At the same time, he would add some gold and jade so that Lu would feel obliged to help again. Very soon, Yongzhu set off. He carried Shangyi himself, wrapped layer after layer in yellow silk, holding it as if it were a fragile, ancient relic, walking carefully and not daring to take long strides. When he reached Lu, he bowed on the court in front of Duke Zhuang, took the bronze out from his arms, and said respectfully, "This treasure was originally the property of Song, your state. Sent it to our late ruler Duke Zhuang of Song as a heavy gift. Our new ruler does not dare to keep it for himself. Please take it and bring it back to Song as a gift in place of those 3 cities. Besides this, we are adding 30 pairs of white jade and 2,000 yi of gold. We ask you to make one more hard trip and go to Song again to speak for us." His tone was very low and humble. Duke Zhuang understood that he himself was in a difficult middle position. But since Xin had already dug up this old account and sent back Shangyi, if he refused now, he would lose face, so he nodded and said, "All right, I will go one more time." So Duke Zhuang of Lu set out on a second journey and arranged to meet Duke Zhuang of Song at a place called Guku. When they arrived at Guku, the armies of both states camped outside and the 2 rulers met inside a large pavilion tent, as usual. They began with polite talk, asked after each other's health and their states, drank a little wine, and exchanged formal words when the ceremonies were finished. Duke Zhuang turned to the real subject once again. He admitted Zheng's fault on Duke Li's behalf. He said that Zheng had indeed been slow in delivering what it owed and that he had already scolded Duke Li harshly for it to show his sincerity. He had now brought 30 more pairs of white jade and 2,000 yi of gold. While he spoke, he asked his attendants to carry the chests of gold and jade forward and open them for Duke Zhuang to see. Duke Zhuang looked down and saw that the amount was not small, but his face did not soften. The first thing he asked was, "And what about the 3 cities? When will they be handed over?" His words were very direct. The meaning was clear. Money could be discussed. The cities could not be left out. Duke Zhuang had no choice but to pass on Duke Li's concerns. "Honestly," he said, "Duke Li has said again and again that he is a new ruler and does not dare cut away his ancestors' land just to resolve personal debts between himself and Song. Those cities are the foundation that past rulers of Zheng won in war and maintained through their governance. If he gives them away as soon as he takes the throne, he will lose face. It will be hard to explain both at home and abroad, so he hopes to use one true treasure in place of the 3 cities." At this point, he motioned to his attendants. They lifted up that yellow-wrapped bundle high in their hands and carried it on their knees to Duke Zhuang. As soon as Duke Zhuang heard the phrase personal grievances, his face changed and he looked displeased. In his own mind, he was thinking, "I sent you back to your state and put you on the throne. That is just a personal grievance. Are you saying I have meddled too much?" He reached out and slowly unwrapped the yellow silk and recognized the object inside at a glance. It was a heavy bronze vessel with complex patterns in a solemn shape. It was exactly the Shangyi. His father's generation had spent a fortune to create this vessel, had once been Song's own treasure in order to buy the favor of Duke Zhuang of Zhen. Back then, he had hardened his heart and sent it away. Now it had gone in a circle and come back into his hands. Duke Zhuang's feelings were very complicated. On one side, he felt deeply embarrassed. On the other, he forced himself to look calm. He pretended not to know and asked, and what special use does this thing have? Duke Zhuang of Lu knew perfectly well that he was pretending ignorance, but he still patiently explained, "This vessel was originally your state's treasure. When Duke Zhuang of Zheng helped you through a crisis, you sent Shang Yi to him. He kept it close to him like something held to the heart. Now Duke Li has taken the throne. He does not dare go on holding it, because he is afraid people will think he is part of those old events, so he has chosen to return this treasure to you in one piece, and hopes that, for the sake of the friendship between your two states in the past, you will stop pressing Zheng for land if you agree. The present ruler of Zheng, and the rulers after him, will all remember your kindness." The more Duke Zhuang heard about those old events, the redder his face became. He knew exactly what they were pointing at back then. It had been a major case of murdering a ruler and seizing the throne. He had relied on bribing other states to push it down now. Right in front of him, Duke Zhuang had placed the physical proof back on the table. It was like putting his black history out in the open. To keep the conversation from sliding further into embarrassment, he could only say coolly, "I do not remember those old matters very clearly. I will go back and ask the people who handled them." With that, he blurred the issue. He neither agreed nor refused. While they were speaking, someone outside came in to report that the ruler of Yan had arrived at Guku to pay his respects to the ruler of Song. Duke Zhuang ordered that the ruler of Yan be brought in and had him sit with Duke Zhuang. The three rulers sat in a small circle under the great tent, and for a moment the mood became lighter. The ruler of Yan stepped forward and bowed and then spoke about his own request. He said, "Our state of Yan borders Qi, and we are constantly bullied and harassed by Qi. Our own strength is weak, and we do not dare openly break with them. I have heard that Song now carries a lot of weight among the lords. I have come to ask you to speak to Qi for us and calm things down so that our state can live in peace." Duke Zhuang felt that this was not a difficult request. He himself wanted more prestige among the lords, so he nodded and said, "That can be done. I will take this matter on." Standing to one side, Duke Zhuang immediately picked up the thread. He thought of his own ties with the state of Ji and said, "Since the ruler of Song is willing to stand up for Yan, then I, as ruler of Lu, can also say a word for Ji and Qi have been enemies for generations. Qi has always had designs on Ji. If you can persuade Qi to let Yan go, then I will go to Qi and ask them to ease up on Ji as well." The three of them quickly found common ground and held a formal alliance ceremony there at Guku. On the surface, it looked like a very righteous, multilateral meeting, Song acting as the mediator, Lu speaking for Ji, Song helping Yan, and Qi seeming to be the next state they would target for persuasion. When the rites were done, Duke Zhuang went back to Lu, and the ruler of Yan returned home with some hope in his heart, waiting for news. But as days went by, from autumn into winter, Yan and Ji heard nothing at all from Song about any mediation. Duke Zhuang seemed to have no urgent wish to carry out his promises at Guku. At the same time, Song was still sending envoys again and again to Zhen, pushing for payments, and for the three cities, Duke Li of Zhen was driven into a corner and had no choice but to ask Duke Zhuang of Lu one more time to help mediate. Duke Zhuang, in his nature, had wanted to maintain the balance between states, but he began to see that Duke Zhuang not only broke his promise to Lu, he also ignored Yan's request and had done nothing, all while keeping his eyes fixed firmly on Zheng's cities. Slowly, a real anger grew in his heart. Even so, he still followed the forms. He arranged one more meeting with Duke Zhuang, this time at a place called Zugui, hoping to talk again and make things clear. This time, however, Duke Zhuang did not even show his face. He sent someone with a single message. He said, "The matters between my state and Zheng were clearly agreed. Long ago, I asked the ruler of Lu not to interfere again." That sentence was the same as publicly putting Duke Zhuang to one side and saying, "Do not meddle any further." When Duke Zhuang heard it, his anger flared at once. On his own court, he cursed Duke Zhuang. In front of his ministers, he said, "This man is greedy without limit, and does not keep his word with such character. Most people would not accept him even as a friend. Let alone a ruler, he is hardly better than an ordinary commoner." Once he had spoken, the last thin thread in his heart snapped. He turned his back on Song, and went straight to Zun, at a place called Wufu. He met with Duke Li of Zun. The two rulers sat together, went over everything Duke Zhuang had done recently, and quickly agreed that they should join forces and attack Song. You can picture the map at this point. Lu lay to the northwest of Songzun lay, to the southwest. If those two states moved together against Song, Song would be like a piece of meat clamped between the jaws of a pair of tongs. Just as Lu and Zheng formed their alliance, Duke Zhuang soon received the news that Duke Zhuang had turned his anger into armed force and was joining Duke Li to march on Song. He understood that this time Duke Zhuang was truly angry and would not be satisfied. As before, with only talking, Before long, he heard another piece of news. Duke Zhi of Qi was still unhappy with Duke Li and had refused to speak for Zheng. That gave Duke Zhuang another angle to work with. He realized he could make use of Duke Zhi's sympathy for the deposed ruler, Duke Zhou, and sent Prince Yu as envoy to Qi. This mission had clear tasks. The first was to accuse Duke Li of Zheng of breaking his word. Prince Yu was to say, "Back when Prince Tu was in our state of Song, it was my ruler who sent him home. Everything he promised us has still not been delivered." The second task was to test whether Duke Zhi would be willing to join Song in overthrowing Duke Li and putting the exiled Duke Zhou back on the throne. When Prince Yu arrived in Qi, he followed his instructions and laid everything out to Duke Zhi at the inn. He added a very tempting line. He said, "My ruler now regrets helping Prince Tu's side. If you are willing, we can raise troops together against him, bring Duke Xiao back to Zheng, and put him on the throne again. When that is done, our state of Song can also take the chance to help Yan make peace with Qi." As soon as Duke Zhi heard this, he was naturally moved. He had always leaned toward Duke Zhao's side. Now that Song itself was offering a plan to restore the old ruler, it was a very attractive chance for him. But before he had given a clear answer, and before Prince Yu had returned to Song, the next round of fighting had already broken out. At that moment, the border officials of Song rushed to the capital and reported, "The armies of Lu and Zheng have joined forces and are marching together. Their banners stretch in one line and their morale is high. They have already reached the city of Suyang, in our state." When Duke Zhuang heard this, his heart tightened. He knew there was no use in delaying any longer. He quickly summoned his ministers to discuss what to do. This time, their opinions were clearly split into two camps. One camp argued for peace. Their spokesman was Prince Yu. He stepped forward and spoke very seriously. He said, "Lu and Zheng are attacking us together for a reason. We have been greedy for Zhen's gifts and we have broken our agreement with Lu. In terms of reputation, we are clearly at fault. They are now fighting under a banner of justice if we insist on resisting. We will not have the moral high ground. It would be better to admit our mistake, seek peace ourselves, and avoid a bigger war." The other camp believed that to bow when the enemy was at the gates would make the state look weak. Nunggong Chengguan spoke for this side. He said, "If the enemy has already come up to our walls and we have not even raised our weapons before we fall to our knees and ask for peace, that is too shameful. Others will see our state as timid and fearful who will respect us after that." The Grand Steward Huadu, sitting to the side, naturally stood with Nunggong Chengguan and agreed with him. He said, "Chengguan is right. If we show weakness now, our reputation will disappear." Hearing this, Duke Zhuang's inner balance slowly tipped toward war. He did not accept Prince Yu's advice. Instead, he made a decision on the spot. He appointed Nunggong Chengguan as commander to lead the defense. Nunggong Chengguan then recommended Meng Huo as the vanguard. Leading the charge in front, Song gathered 300 war chariots and prepared to fight the joint armies of Lu and Zhong. Very soon the two sides drew up their lines. Duke Wan of Lu and Duke Li of Zheng stood together on one war chariot and came in person to the front. In fact, they had hoped to call Duke Wang out and speak face to face to see whether there was still a way to step back at the last moment. So from their chariot, they raised their flags and called loudly for Duke Zhuang of Song to come out of his camp. Duke Zhuang was deeply uneasy. He thought of his trail of broken promises to Lu, to Zheng, and to Yan and Ji, where he had never done what he said, to stand in front of the armies and let his enemies list his failures one by one. He had nothing to answer with, so he claimed to be unwell and refused to appear, sending Nunggong Chengguan alone to meet the challenge. Nunggong Chengguan stood at the front of the Song army. Looking across the field, he saw two finely embroidered parasols floating above one chariot and knew that was where the rulers of Lu and Zhong were standing. He slapped the back of Meng Huo beside him and said, "Today is your day to win glory. Charge in and give them a real shock." Meng Huo took the order, gripped his heavy iron spear, drove his chariot forward, and rushed ahead. The wheels rattled on the ground, dust rose into the air, and he himself was like a rough iron arrow, aimed straight at the chariot of the two rulers. When Duke Wan and Duke Li saw one chariot from the Song side racing toward them faster than the others with its spear pointed straight at them, they hurriedly pulled their own chariot back a little. At that moment, the guards around them tensed, and from both sides high-ranking officers charged out and placed their chariots in front of the rulers. On one side was Prince Niavu, on the other was Yuan Fen of Zheng. The two of them gripped their weapons and swung their chariots across the front of the line, pinning Meng Huo's chariot in place. By the customs of the time, before fighting, you still asked your opponent's name. Yuan Fen shouted, "Who are you?" Meng Huo replied, "I am Meng Huo, vanguard of Song." Yuan Fen laughed and said, "So you are only a vanguard? You are not worthy of our general's hand. If our commander were to strike you down, it would be a waste of his blade. Call out your real commander." These words stung Meng Huo. His face flushed with anger. He stopped talking and thrust forward with his spear, aiming straight at Yuan Fan. Yuan Fan did not give ground. He raised his sword to meet him, and the two of them clashed at once. At the same time, Prince Ni of Lu directed his own chariots to wheel around and surround the soldiers who had come with Meng Huo, wrapping them in a tight ring of wooden wheels and spears. Meng Huo now faced two strong opponents and was trapped inside a circle of enemy soldiers. The pressure on him grew heavier with each moment. Then two more Lu generals charged forward, Lord Qin and Lord Liang. And from the Zheng side, the General Tambo also came with his men. Several officers at once joined the assault on Meng Huo. Meng Huo had a hard temper at first. He gritted his teeth and held on, blocking left and right and fighting desperately, but the pressure from four directions came down harder and harder until he finally opened a gap. Lord Liang seized the moment, drew his bow, pulled the string to the full, and loosed an arrow. It flew straight into Meng Huo's right arm. His iron spear fell from his hand. In the next instant, the enemy officers swarmed in, climbed onto his chariot, and forced him down, tying him tightly with ropes. The chariot and armored guards who had come out with him were also captured. Only 50 or 60 foot soldiers managed to escape in the confusion. Back in the Song lines, Nanguan Chengguan heard that his personally chosen vanguard had been taken alive. He was so angry that his teeth almost cracked. He roared in his camp, "If I do not get Meng Huo back, I am not a man." At once, he called his eldest son Nangon Yu and said, "Take 30 chariots and go out to provoke them. First use your tongue to curse Duke Li of Zhen when the fighting starts. Pretend you cannot beat them, and fall back on purpose toward the west gate of the city. Once you bring them there, I will have my own way of dealing with them." Nangon Yu was young and hot-blooded, and with his father behind him, he agreed readily. He took up a long halberd, climbed onto his chariot, and drove out to the front. As he went, he shouted at the top of his voice, "Zhen too! You ungrateful man! It was our state of Song that took you in, and now you have come back to attack our gates? You came here looking for death. Why do you not surrender?" His shout drew the attention of a Zhang general who was patrolling the line with a few archers. Seeing that Nangon Yu was not very old and spoke with such arrogance, he felt like teaching him a lesson and drove his chariot forward to fight. They exchanged only a few rounds when Nangon Yu, following his father's plan, suddenly swung his chariot around and pretended to flee. The Zhang general saw that he really looked flustered and chased after him, shouting insults as he went. The chariot in front raced away. The chariot behind refused to let go. They ran from the center of the battlefield all the way to the west gate of Song City. The distance between them grew shorter and shorter. The Zhang general thought only of winning merit and paid no attention to what was happening around him. Just as they neared the gate, the signal fire sounded. Hidden troops leapt out at once. At the city gate, Nangon Changguan had been waiting with a picked force in ambush. Now he charged out from the side and cut off the Zhang general's retreat. Nangon Yu also turned his chariot around and attacked from the front. The Zhang general panicked. He loosed several arrows in a row, but none hit Nangon Yu. The more he shot, the more his hands shook. At that moment, Nangon Chengguan saw his chance. He jumped onto the enemy chariot in one leap, grabbed the Zhang general with both hands, and dragged him down alive. Back in the Zheng lines, Yuan Fen heard that his subordinate officer had chased a single enemy chariot deep into hostile ground and had been gone a long time without returning. He sensed trouble and quickly went with Tang Bo and a detachment of troops to rescue him. When they reached the city gate, they saw it standing wide open, and the Grand Steward Hua Du leading the Song army out of the city to support Nangon Changguan. Almost at the same time, Prince Ni of Lu, with Lord Qin and Lord Liang at his side, also reached the field to fight again. The armies on both sides became entangled. Night-deepened soldiers lit torches, and the whole battlefield flickered with unsteady light weapons, clashed and wheels rumbled. The fighting went on in this chaos until the roosters crowed before it finally died down. After the battle, Nanguan Changwen brought the captured Zheng general into the camp and presented him to Duke Zhuang. As proof of his merit, he then said to Duke Zhuang, "Meng Huo, our vanguard, has been taken by them. Now we have captured one of their important officers. We can send someone to the Zheng camp and propose an exchange. Trade their man for ours." Duke Zhuang thought it over and agreed that such an exchange would at least save a little face. He allowed envoys to go to the Xian army to discuss swapping prisoners. When Duke Li of Xin heard that Song was willing to exchange Meng Huo for his own captured officer, he also felt this was good for both sides and agreed. So at the agreed time, the two states pushed out their prisoners in wooden cages into the open space between the lines. Song rolled Meng Huo's cart to the middle. Zheng rolled their own officer's cart to the same spot. The envoys on both sides traded leads, and each state brought its man back to its own camp. Duke Zhuang of Song was more and more unhappy with Duke Li of Zheng. In his heart, he always wanted to find a chance to pull Li down from the throne and bring the old ruler, Duke Zhou, back to Zheng again, so he sent Prince Yu to Qi, hoping to pull Duke Shi of Qi into an alliance and join forces against Zheng. Prince Yu arrived in Qian laid out Duke Zhuang's idea very clearly in simple words. He said something like this: Zheng Tua is ungrateful. You and Qi have never liked him anyway. Why do we not join hands, knock him off the throne, and send his older brother Duke Zhou back to be ruler of Zheng? When Duke Shi heard this, he nodded and said, Zheng Tu drove his own brother away and sat on the throne himself. I have disliked him for a long time. On this point, we feel the same. At this point, you might think the alliance was set, but it was not, Duke. She let out a long sigh and said, But right now we and Qi are busy fighting the state of Ji. We have a pile of things in our hands and no spare strength to discuss an alliance with you in Song. If your state is willing to send troops to help me fight Ji now, I will remember that favor when I am finished with my business here. Of course, I will also help you in Song and march with you against Zheng. Prince Yu could see the meaning very clearly. Qi wanted to destroy Ji first before it would have time to deal with Zheng, so he took his leave of Duke Shi and went back to Song to report the result of his mission. Then the scene shifts to the big joint camp of Lu and Zheng. There, Duke Quan of Lu and Duke Li of Zheng were sitting together in a large tent that had been put up just for this campaign. They were discussing how to attack Song step by step and how to push closer and closer to the Song capital. They were in the middle of planning when a soldier rushed in with a report. The messenger said, The state of Ji has sent people to beg for help. Duke Wan quickly ordered them to be brought, and the envoy from Ji came forward, holding a letter in both hands and kneeling to present it. The letter was very clear. It said, The army of Qi is attacking our state of Ji with great force. Our city is hard to defend and may fall at any time. Ji and Lu have been joined in marriage ties for generations. Now we are at a life and death moment. We beg Lu to send troops to save us. After Duke Wan finished reading the letter, he froze for a moment and thought to himself, This is serious. He turned at once and said to Duke Li of Zheng, The state of Ji is hanging by a thread and it is tied to us and Lu by family bonds. I cannot just stand by. Besides, the capital of Song will not be taken in 1 day or 2. Why do we not pull our army back first and go to rescue? Ji-song has been frightened enough by us after this. They are not likely to come out again and squeeze us for payment. Duke Li listened and agreed readily. He said, If you must go back to save Ji, then I and Zheng will go with you. If we two states go together, our voice will be stronger. Duke Wan was very glad to hear this and gave the order on the spot to strike camp. The Lu army marched in front, the Zheng army brought up the rear, the joint forces wheeled around and set out, changing their target to the state of Ji. You can picture it in the great camp. The flags were taken down one by one, tents were pulled apart one by one, the chariots lined up and rolled away from the border of Song. The main road shook with the sound of wheels and hooves. In Song, the court first received the news that Prince Ye had brought back from Qi. That Qi had agreed in principle to help Song attack Zhang right. After that, they got a report from the frontier that the camps of Lu and Zheng were breaking down and moving away. The Song generals were cautious at first. They suspected that the enemy might be putting on a show to lure them deeper into the field, so they did not dare rush to chase. They only sent scouts to follow from far away. After a while, the scouts came back and reported, The enemy troops really have all pulled out of Song's territory and are marching toward the state of Ji. Only then did the court of Song relax and accept that the joint army of Lu and Zheng had truly turned away. At this point, the Grand Steward Huadu offered Duke Zhuang a plan. He said, Since Qi has agreed to help us attack Zheng, we cannot just talk and do nothing. Now that Qi is throwing its full strength into attacking Ji, we should also send troops to help them. Only then will they take our request seriously later. As soon as Nangong Chengguan heard this, he stepped forward again and asked for the job. He said, I am willing to lead the army myself. So once again, Duke Zhuang of Song called out his troops. He sent 200 war chariots and once more put Meng Huo in front as vanguard. They drove night and day to reach the battlefield in Ji and support Qi. Now let us briefly look at what had been happening between Qi and Ji. Duke Shi of Qi had long since decided that he wanted to wipe out the state of Ji. He not only sent his own troops, he also invited the states of Wei and Yan to join him. They sent a formal declaration of war to Ji. It was 3 states pulling together to crush one small state. In Wei, it happened to be the time when the ruler Duke Zhuang of Wei had just died, and his son Shuo had taken the throne. The man later known as Duke Wei of Wei by custom. When there was mourning at home, it was not fitting to send armies out to war, but Kuei had personally come to ask for help, and Wei did not dare offend it. In the end, they gritted their teeth and sent out 200 chariots to join the attack. The ruler of Yan had always been afraid of Qi, and felt that sooner or later his state would be swallowed. He very much wanted to stay on Qi's good side when he heard that Duke Shi was going to attack Qi. He saw a chance to show his loyalty, and went in person at the head of his army. So the armies of Qi, Wei and Yan moved together and pressed down in force on the capital of Ji. The ruler of Ji stood on the city wall and looked out. He saw ranks of banners stretching across the fields. He knew very well that if he took his own small army out to fight them head-on, he would not last long, so he chose to stay behind his walls. He strengthened the defenses as fast as he could and decided to hold out and buy time, guarding while he waited for help. Not long after, the scouts of Ji brought back good news. They said, "The joint forces of Lu and Zheng have arrived, and both rulers are leading the troops in person." The ruler of Ji heard this and rushed up the wall to look. Sure enough, in the distance he could see the flags of Lu and Zheng moving closer. He felt a sudden calm and began at once to arrange his troops so they could fight together with Lu and Zheng. Duke Zhuang of Lu brought his army up first and drew his lines under the walls of Ji. There on the field, he faced Duke Shi of Kiev. Duke Zhuang spoke first. His tone was polite, but his meaning was firm. He said, "The state of Ji and our state of Lu have been bound by marriage for generations. I heard that Ji has somehow offended you, so I have come in person with my troops to ask you to show them mercy for our sake." Duke Shi did not soften. Instead, he brought up an old case. He said, "Our ancestor Duke Ai of Kiev was slandered by people in front of the king of Zhou because of the state of Ji. And in the end, he was boiled to death by the Zhou court. 8 generations have passed since then. That hatred cannot be borne under the same sky. I have sent troops today to avenge my ancestor. You have come to help your relatives. I have come to avenge my line. This matter can only be settled on the battlefield." He left no room for compromise. Duke Zhuang listened. His own face hardened and he stopped trying to persuade him. He ordered Prince Ni to go out first to fight. Qi sent its famous general, Prince Pengsheng. Pengsheng was a kind of warrior who could stand against 10,000 men. His courage and strength were both astonishing. As soon as Prince Ni engaged him, he fell behind, even when the Lu generals Lord Qin and Lord Liang joined in to help. They could only barely hold the line. They could not gain the upper hand. While they were fighting, the commanders of Wei and Yan received word that Qi and Lu were already clashing at the front. So they hurried to bring their troops to the same field and joined the fight. More and more banners moved onto the plain, and the whole battle became more and more confused. At this key moment, the army of Zheng arrived. On the Zhong side, Yuanfan led Tambo and other generals and drove straight toward the main camp of Qi, hoping to strike Qi from the flank and the rear. The ruler of Zhe had been waiting for this chance. He sent his younger brother Yingji out of the city with troops to attack as well. The shouting of Gehazi's soldiers rang out suddenly around the city. Prince Pengsheng saw that the tide of battle was turning against him. He did not dare keep fighting to the death. He turned his chariot and fell back toward his own lines. For a while, the chariots of 6 different states were mixed together. The whole field was boiling over. In the middle of this chaos, Duke Zhuang of Lu happened to cross paths with the ruler of Yan. Right there on the battlefield, he turned on the ruler of Yan and scolded him. He said, "Not long ago, the states of Song, Lu and Yan made an alliance at Guku and promised to keep our word. Yet Song turned its back at once and broke its promise. That is why I brought troops against them. And now, what are you doing today? You are copying Song and clinging tightly to Qi's thigh. Do you not think at all about your own state's future?" The ruler of Yan was scolded in front of everyone. He knew he was in the wrong, and he was also afraid of offending Lu. So he bowed his head and said nothing. He quickly turned his chariot and withdrew, making excuses that he could not win and had to retreat. The army of Wei had never had strong generals, and its morale was low when the combined troops of Lu, Zhen, and Ji hit them. They broke fast once. Wei's forces were in disorder. The pressure on Qi increased again, and Qi had to pull back as well. Bodies piled up on the ground, and the earth ran red. Prince Pengsheng took an arrow in his body and almost lost his life, only getting back to camp under the guard of his men. Just as Qi's troops were falling back step by step, the army of Song finally reached the area of the battle, but before they could rest or set up proper lines, Lu and Zhen each sent a picked force to strike them. Song's army had arrived late and had not had time to steady its formation. Hit suddenly like this, they had no chance to build a proper camp and were themselves beaten badly and forced to flee in confusion. When this war was over, Ji had been saved for the time being. The ruler of Ji came out of the city himself to welcome Duke Zhuang of Lu and Duke Li of Zheng. He invited the two rulers into the city and held a great feast to thank them for saving his state. He rewarded his soldiers generously with food and drink and let them rest. At the feast, the ruler's younger brother Yingji stepped forward and said, "Qi has suffered a loss this time, and will surely carry this hatred in its heart. It will only want even more to destroy Ji in the future. With both of you here today, may I ask whether you can help us think of some way for Ji to go on living?" Duke Zhuang sighed and said, "Right now, I cannot think of any complete solution. We can only wait and plan slowly in the future." The next day, the ruler of Ji personally escorted the armies of Lu and Zheng out of the city. He walked with them for more than 30 li when they parted. His eyes were full of tears, because he knew that although he had barely held on this time, the days ahead would not be peaceful. Not long after Duke Zhuang got back to Lu, Duke Li of Zheng sent envoys again, asking to form a formal alliance from that year onward. Lu and Zheng stood together on one side, Qi and Song stood together on the other. Among the lords a clear split had taken shape. Zheng, the lord of the territory of the Zhuan, died. The chief minister Zhou reported this to Duke Li and took the chance to propose that Tenbo take over Zhuan's post and be in charge of guarding the duke. Li agreed. All of this happened in the 22nd year of King Wan of Zhou. In another corner, after Duke Shi of Qi had suffered defeat in Ji, he returned to his own state, angry and frustrated. Not long after, he fell sick. As the illness dragged through the winter and grew heavier, he knew he would not live. He called his eldest son Zhou to his bedside and gave him a few last instructions. He said to Zhou, "The state of Ji is the enemy of our state, of Qi generation after generation. Any son or grandson who can destroy Ji is the one who will be most filial to our ancestors. When you take my place in the future, you must treat the destruction of Ji as your first duty. If you do not avenge this hatred, then when you die, do not expect to enter the ancestral temple." Zhou listened and nodded, fixing the words in his heart. Duke Shi then called in Wu Zhe, the only son of his younger brother Ye Zhongnian, and told him to kowtow to Zhou and recognize him as his ruler. Duke Shi also told Zhou, "This is your uncle's only son. You must take good care of him in the future, give him food, clothing, and everything else according to the standards I set while I was alive." After he had given out all these orders about family ties and old resentments, Duke Shi settled his affairs and passed away. The ministers of Qi mourned according to the rites and then raised Zhou to the throne. Later generations called him Duke Zhuang of Qi. He is the man we will hear more of in later stories. At the same time, Duke Zhuang of Song had not softened at all in his hatred toward Zheng. In fact, after the war over Ji, his anger grew deeper. His mind was full of thoughts of revenge. He took the gold and jade which Zheng had sent before and divided them into several portions. He sent them as gifts to the courts of Qihaiwei and Chen. His words called them presents, but his meaning was clear. "I am now going to punish Zheng. I hope you will send troops to help." Because Duke Xin had just died in Qi and the court was still in mourning, Qi could not send its full power. It only sent the officer Yongbing with 150 chariots to support Song, the states of Katai, and Wei also each sent generals with troops to join in. Together these states merged their forces and moved toward Zheng. At first Duke Li of Xin wanted to do what he had done before, taking his army out into the open fields to meet them, but Zhou stopped him and said, "That will not do. Song is a great state, and this time it has poured out all its forces and is coming with a stomach full of anger. If we go out to fight and lose, the state will be gone. If we somehow win, the hatred between us and them will grow deeper and deeper in the future. They will come at us again and again, and we will never know peace. Rather than that, it is better this time to stay behind the walls and not go out to fight at all." Duke Li wavered in his heart. He still wanted to hold on to some face. Zhou saw he was undecided and simply used his own authority to give a hard order. He commanded all the people of the state to defend the walls and not open the gates. Anyone who dared to speak of going out to fight would be beheaded on the spot and their head hung up as a warning. Duke Zhuang of Song saw that Zheng would not come out and fight and that no open battle appeared even after many days. So he turned to ravaging the land near the capital of Zheng. He burned and looted the fields and villages to the east of the city. After that, he ordered his men to use fire to attack Zheng's channel gate, burning down the houses and defenses near the wall, and opening a gap by force. The Song army poured through the breach and rushed into the streets of Zhen, fighting their way all the way to Zheng's ancestral temple. The ancestral temple was the most important place in the state, holding the spirit tablets of past rulers. The Song troops did not just break in, they tore the temple down. They pulled down the rafters from the roof and dragged them away, and only then did they turn back and march home. All of this was payback for an old wound years earlier. Duke Zhuang of Zheng had burned the temple gate of Song. Now Duke Zhuang of Song pulled down Zheng's ancestral temple on purpose to send that cutback. Duke Li of Zheng stood on the city wall and watched it all. His heart was full of shame and anger when the Song troops finally withdrew. He let out a long sigh and said, "As ruler of this state, I am completely in Zhu's hands. I cannot even decide to go out and fight. What is the point of being a ruler like this?" From that day on, Duke buried the dangerous thought in his heart. Someday, he told himself, I must get rid of Zhu. At this time, King Wan of Zhou was very ill. He could not get up from his bed. He knew his time was almost over. So he called Duke Zhuang of Zhou to his bedside. King Wan spoke very clearly, in very simple words. He said, "According to ritual and the established system, the throne should pass to my eldest son, that is the rule, but I personally prefer my second son, K. What I am asking you to do is something for the future after my eldest son takes the throne and becomes king. When he dies one day, you must help my second son K succeed him. When that time comes, you must step forward and take charge of this matter." After saying this, King Wan of Zhou closed his eyes and died. Duke Zhuang did not act recklessly. He followed the rites and first put the elder son, Tu, on the throne as the new son of heaven. This was the later King Zhuang of Zhou. As for whether the second son K could inherit in the future, that is another story and will not be opened here. The scene now turns to Zheng. When Duke of Zheng heard that there was mourning in the Zhou royal house and that King Wan had died, he thought about proper etiquette as a vassal lord. He asked himself, should I send people to offer condolences and show my grief? Just as he formed this idea, his chief minister Zhou came out and opposed it. Zhou said to Duke Li, "The Zhou royal line is the enemy of our Zhen ancestors. Our own general Zhu Dan once shot an arrow that hit King Wan of Zhou in the shoulder. Now that King Wan has died, if we send people to cry, to mourn and offer condolences, we will only be met with cold faces and humiliation. It is not suitable to do this." Duke Li answered aloud, "You make sense then. We will not go." But inside his heart, his resentment toward Zhu grew deeper. He thought to himself, even whether I go or do not go to offer condolences has to follow your will. What use is there in me being ruler? This kind of sour feeling built up over time and later turned into a real life and death struggle. One day, Duke Li was walking in his rear garden to clear his mind. It was spring, the plants and trees in the garden were budding, and the air was warm. Only one man followed at his side, the minister Yang Zhu. The two men walked and enjoyed the view as they went. They looked up and saw many birds flying in the sky. The birds flew and called to each other, answering one another from branch to branch. They looked free and happy. Duke Li watched and suddenly let out a sigh. This sigh did not sound cheerful. It was full of sadness. Yang Zhu asked, "Now it is spring, the weather is good, the wind is warm, all the birds are flying through the sky, calling loudly, everything looks joyful. You are the ruler of a state. You do not need to worry about food or clothing. You have power and rank, but you do not look happy at all. Why is that?" Duke Li said something very heavy. "These birds can fly freely. They can call as they wish and fly where they like, without being controlled by anyone. When I look back at myself, I am still not as free as these birds, so I cannot be happy." Yang Zhu heard the deeper meaning in this. He knew this was not just a comment on nature, so he pushed gently and asked more. He was quite direct. He said, "Is your unhappiness because of the people who hold real power in our state? Is it because someone is pressing you down too hard?" Duke Li sighed again and said, "Ah." That sigh was an admission. Yang Zhu followed on and said, "I once heard the elders say a line, a ruler is like a father, a minister is like a son. When a son sees his father troubled and cannot help to ease his worries, that son is unfilial. When a minister sees his ruler full of worry and cannot help him find a way out, that minister is disloyal." Then he lowered his tone and added, "If you are still willing to trust me, Yang Zhu, and still see me as one of your own people, then whatever weighs on your heart, whatever trouble you cannot solve, give it to me. I am willing to risk my life for you." The meaning was very clear. If you want to move against someone, say the word and I will do it for you. Duke Li waved his attendants away and told them to step far back so they would not listen in when the area was quiet. He said to Yang Zhu, "Zhu is your father-in-law. You are his son-in-law." He meant, "Do you stand on his side?" Yang Zhu said, "It is true that I am his son-in-law, but when it comes to his affection for me, there is not much. He does not really love me. I married his daughter because Duke Zhuang of Song ordered me to take her. I did not dare disobey. This marriage was not just Zhu's own wish." Then he pointed out the real key. Whenever Zhu mentions Duke Zhou, he shows a very longing expression in his heart. He has always thought of Zhou. He simply fears the state of Song and does not dare move. These words laid Zhu's feelings out in the open, where Duke Li could hear them. When Duke Li heard this, anger rose in him again. He lowered his voice and said to Yang Zhu, "If you can get rid of Zhu, I will let you take his place and make you chief minister. I only do not know whether you have a way to do it. Zhou said. After the Song army burned and plundered the eastern outskirts, that whole area was ruined and the common people there have still not settled down again. Tomorrow you can issue an order. Tell the Minister of Civil Affairs to go first and repair the houses in the east and arrange places for the people to live. Then have Zhou go with grain and clothing to the eastern fields to comfort the people and give them supplies. I will prepare a feast for him in the east and show him full respect. Then I will put poison in the wine and kill him. Duke said, I will leave this to you. Be careful, be cautious, do not make a mistake. At that point, their plot was set. When Zhu returned home and saw his wife Lady Ji, his face was tight from tension and his words came out in a confused way. Lady Ji was Zhu's daughter and Zhu's wife. When she saw her husband like this, she became suspicious and asked, Did something happen at court today? Why do you look so nervous? Zhu said, Nothing has happened. Lady Ji did not believe it. She said, Your expression and the look on your face clearly show something is wrong. We have been husband and wife for many years. We should trust each other. If something has happened, you should not hide it from me. Zhu made up a story. He said, The ruler has ordered your father to go to the eastern fields to comfort the people. I am going to hold a feast for him there and celebrate his birthday. That is all there is. Nothing else. Lady Ji at once raised a very practical question. You want to invite my father to a meal? You can do that in the city. Why does it have to be outside the walls? Zhu said, This is the ruler's order. I am only following it. You do not need to ask more. When Lady Ji heard this, her doubts deepened on the surface. She smiled and played along, but inside, she decided she must find out the truth. That night, she deliberately prepared extra wine and urged Zhu to drink cup after cup. Zhu already felt guilty with his wife pressing him to drink. He soon became very drunk and his speech grew confused. When he was thoroughly drunk and no longer clear-minded, Lady Ji lowered her voice, made it sound like a man's voice, and spoke into his ear. She said, The ruler ordered you to kill Zhou. Have you already forgotten? Half awake and half asleep, Zhu could not tell who was speaking. He answered on instinct. He said, How could I forget that? Those few words came out of his own mouth and admitted the secret in his heart. Early the next morning when Zhu woke, his head still hurt. He had no memory of what he had said the night before. As soon as she saw he was awake, Lady Ji said to him, I already know about your plan to harm my father. Zhu denied it by habit. He said, There is no such thing. Do not speak nonsense. Lady Ji stayed very calm and said, Last night you were drunk and said it yourself. It is useless to deny it now. Seeing he could not hide it, Zhu changed his line and said, Even if there is such a thing, what do you plan to do? Lady Ji said, People say that after a woman marries, she should follow her husband. They put it in a saying and call it follow the rooster if you marry a rooster, and follow the dog if you marry a dog. But I asked my mother and I know better, no matter what others say. Since I am your wife, I still have to ask my mother what she thinks. So Zhu told her everything that had happened in the garden with Duke Li, all the details of their plot, without holding anything back. After she listened, Lady Ji did not scold him at once. Instead, she went along with him and said, My father may not agree to go to the east. Let me go back to my parents' home and persuade him to go. What do you think? Zhu thought she was truly helping him. He was very pleased and said, When the matter is done, and I become chief minister, you will be the chief minister's wife, and share the glory with me. Lady Ji returned to her parents' home and first met with her mother. She asked her a question that sounded simple, but was in fact crucial. She said, In your heart, my father and my husband, which of these two is closer to you? Her mother did not think long, and answered at once. She said, Both of them are close to you, but if we must compare, your father is closer. Lady Ji pressed further. She said, Why is that? Her mother explained step by step. She said, Before a young woman marries, she has no husband yet, but she already has a father after marriage. Husbands can change. If a husband is lost, a woman can marry again, but a person can only have one birth father. You cannot be born a second time. Love between husband and wife is human order. The way people are meant to be with each other, closeness between father and child is the root. It is the order of heaven. A husband cannot be measured on the same level as a father. The mother spoke casually, with no special plan, but for Lady Ji, it was like a blow to the head that woke her completely. She began to cry and said, For the sake of my father today, I cannot care about my husband. Then, she told her mother, word for word, the whole process of the plot between Zhu and Duke Li to kill Zhou. No one else was present at this talk. After hearing it all, the mother turned pale with fear. She went straight to Zhou and told him everything from beginning to end, without daring to leave out a single detail. When Zhou heard it, he only said one thing. He said, "You two must remember not to speak of this outside. How to deal with it later is not your concern. I will make the arrangements." On the day set by the ruler, Duke Li did indeed issue the order to go to the eastern outskirts and comfort the people before leaving. Zhou called in his trusted guard Kun Chu. As he had planned, Kun Chu brought 10 or so fighters, each of them hiding weapons, and followed quietly in the group. Zhou then ordered Prince Yan to take more than 100 guards and lie in ambush around the eastern fields, with the sole job of supporting him and striking at once if anything happened. Zhou then took his chariot out of the city and headed straight for the east. On his side, Yangju had not been idle. He counted the time and went out to meet them on the road. By the roadside, he had already set up tables with rich food and plenty of wine on the surface. Everything looked joyful, as if he were welcoming his father-in-law with a feast of honor. When Zhou arrived, Yangju went up to meet him with a big smile. He invited Zhou to sit and said, "You have worked your mind and body hard. It is right that you worry for the state. But there has been too much to do these past years, and you truly are tired. Today we are outside the city. The spring light is good. The view is pleasant. Take this as a chance to relax." As he spoke, he filled a large cup of wine with his own hands, held it, and knelt in front of Zhou. He smiled warmly and said, "I wish you long life and health. Please drink this cup." Zhou reached out and pretended to help him up with his right hand. He gripped Yangju's arm tightly with his left hand. He took the cup, but after he took it, he did not bring it to his own mouth. He simply turned his hand and poured the wine onto the ground. As soon as the wine hit the ground, there was a strange reaction. The old text says that fire burst up from the earth, put in plain words. The moment the wine touched the soil, an unnatural light flared. It was clear that there was something wrong with the wine. Seeing this, Zhou stopped pretending. He shouted, "With just this little skill you dare to try and harm me. Do you think you are fit to play tricks on me?" Then he gave the order, "Move." Kong Chu and the 10 or so fighters had been waiting nearby. As soon as they heard the command, they rushed up, threw Yangju to the ground, tied him up on the spot, and cut off his head. Yangju's body was dragged to Zhou Pond and thrown into the water. At the same time, Duke Li had already hidden some of his own warriors in the eastern fields, planning to have them join Yangju in the attack, but before they could act, Prince Yan and the guards hunted them down. They were beaten to pieces, and most of them were killed on the spot. Once Yangju was dead, the matter could not be covered up. Very soon, the whole course of events was reported to Duke Li. When Duke Li heard it, he panicked and said something very direct. He said, "If Zhou can kill his own son-in-law, he will certainly not spare me." Afraid that Zhou would move against him, he hurriedly packed his things and slipped out of Zheng in the night, fleeing to the state of Kai to take refuge. Later, someone told him, the reason the plot failed is that Yangju went home and told his wife about it, and then Lady Ji passed it on to Zhou. That is how Zhou was able to arrange men in advance and deal with you. When Duke Li heard this, he could only give a bitter smile and sigh. He said, "Matters of the state should never be left to women." Yangju told his wife about such an important plot. Of course he was doomed. There was anger in his words and bitterness, and also a little self-comfort. Now, back to Zhou. When he heard that Duke Li had already fled across the border and run to Kai, he knew that the oath he had made to Duke Xiao, who might still be fulfilled. So, he sent Gongfu Dingshu as an envoy to the state of Wei to invite the deposed ruler Duke Xiaohu to come back and again take up the throne of Zheng. Duke Xiao, who had escaped to Wei earlier, the text has already mentioned this. Now Zhou announced to the lords and ministers of Zheng, "I once swore that I would find a way to bring Duke Xiao back to the throne. Today, I am welcoming him to return and rule again. I have not broken the words I spoke to our former ruler." This part of the story ends here. As for what would happen next, whether Zheng would stir into trouble once again, and how the surrounding states would react, the original text only leaves one line. It says, "We do not yet know what came after." We will follow that line and continue the story in the next episode. Chinese culture, mini lesson. Why did ancient Chinese people eat at separate tables? In this episode, let us talk about how people in ancient China ate, especially something you see all the time in historical dramas, but that we, modern people, are no longer used to separate tables and that very proper kneeling posture on floor mats. If you have ever joined the Chinese family for Spring Festival or been to a Chinese wedding, you will notice that when it comes to seating and tables, Chinese people actually have a lot of rules. First, picture this in your mind, not a big noisy round table, but a hall with rows of low little tables, about the height of a modern tea table. In front of each small table sits one person, wearing a wide, long robe, kneeling on a mat with their knees on the floor. Their back is straight, hands neatly placed in front of them. In front of each person, there is only their own portion of food and their own bowl of rice. No one is sharing dishes from one big plate in the middle. This was separatable dining in ancient China. This habit goes back to the very earliest way of sharing food. At the beginning, food was not plentiful. A family or a small tribe would work hard to hunt a bit of meat or dig up some roots. How should they divide it? The simplest and fairest way was to give each person their own share, so everyone could see clearly and no one could steal from someone else. Separate tables grew step by step out of this kind of individual portioning. By the Zhou dynasty, farming became more developed. Grain and meat were not as desperately scarce as before, but the habit of separate portions did not disappear right away. Instead, it was absorbed into ritual and turned into a very refined system of rules. For nobles, eating was not just about filling the stomach. They had to eat in a way that showed rank and character. You can picture another scene: a Zhou noble holds a banquet in the ancestral temple or in his mansion. Mats are spread on the floor. On each mat, there is a low table, which ancient people called an en. On this little table stands that person's own set of bowls, cups, and dishes. The host and guests sit very formally. Their knees are on the mat, legs together, upper body upright. They cannot hunch their backs, and they cannot lean lazily against anything. Even the distance between the body and the small table has rules. Your hand has to be able to reach the dishes, but you are not allowed to lie on the table. Step by step, eating turns into a kind of performance of posture. Since everyone has their own table, the food on each table also needs to be as equal as possible. If someone notices that the meat on their table is a little less, or the dishes look a bit poorer, they will feel slighted and think they have not been properly respected. There is a very vivid story about this in the histories. It tells of Lord Mencheng of Qi hosting a dinner. At night, the lamps are lit, and the guests kneel in rows. Each man has a small table in front of him. One table, one set of dishes. One attendant walks by and, without meaning to, blocks the light so that one guest's table is left in the dark. That guest immediately feels something is wrong and thinks, "Is my rank too low? Did the host purposely give me less food?" The more he thinks about it, the more upset he becomes. In the end, he simply stands up and prepares to leave. Lord Mencheng sees that the situation is about to turn bad. He quickly lifts up his own table, walks over, and sets his own food in front of the unhappy guests so that everyone can clearly see that two tables are exactly the same. Only then does the guest realize he has misunderstood and hurriedly apologizes. The story shows one thing very clearly. In that ritual-heavy setting, eating is not just eating, it is also about face, dignity, and status. A little more meat or a little less, a beam of light falling on your table or not, can make people think a great deal. Posture, in the eyes of ancient people, was also a big deal. The early standard posture was kneeling. Both legs fold back, knees on the ground, the hips resting on the heels, legs together, upper body upright. In their eyes, this posture was proper and respectful, especially in front of others, elders, or the ruler. You had to sit properly. You must not stretch out your legs, and you must not slide your hips around at will. If someone sat very casually, legs spread out or hips flat on the floor, body loose and slumped against a wall, ancient people had a word for that posture. They called it ji ru. Ji is the ji from bamboo winnowing tray. That shallow basket whose edge curls up loosely, the shape is open and spread out, not collected. People borrowed this word to describe a lazy, unrestrained way of sitting with no regard for decorum. There is a famous story about Mencius that shows how serious they were about sitting. One day Mencius came home, opened the door, and saw his wife inside sitting in a very improper way, exactly that loose jiru posture. He was furious on the spot. He felt she had lost all sense of propriety. To sit like that in front of family was a huge disrespect. He was so angry that he wanted to divorce her. When this reached the ears of Mencius's mother, she did not support him at all. She called him over and scolded him. Her main point was, you suddenly rushed into the room without clearing your throat or giving any warning. You were the one who broke the rules first. If you yourself have not behaved with courtesy, how can you use ritual to press others? Only then did Mencius realize he had been too impulsive. People later often used this story to talk about how etiquette must work both ways. But it also shows from another angle how sensitive people at that time were about posture. So here comes the question. If ancient people valued kneeling so much, how did we end up with something we recognize today, sitting on chairs around a table? Behind this change, there is actually a long cultural process. In the very early days, there were no chairs and stools in the Central Plains. When people ate, chatted, or held meetings, they usually knelt on mats or simply sat cross-legged. This habit lasted for hundreds of years. Later, steppe peoples from the north came down. Their lifestyle was completely different from the settled farmers in the Central Plains. They spent most of their time on horseback, living on grasslands where insects were many and damp air rose from the ground. If they knelt like Central Plains people, with knees and hips on the earth, it was easy to get dirty and to catch cold, so they preferred to sit on raised seats. They created a kind of folding camp bed which could also be used as a seat. People in the Central Plains called it a hu bed or hu chair. When these foreign pieces of furniture, clothing, and seating started to spread south, people slowly discovered that sitting higher, with their feet hanging down, was actually quite comfortable. At the same time, steppe riders usually wore full-crotch trousers, convenient for riding and movement. For someone who rides a horse every day, kneeling puts heavy pressure on the knees and makes it hard to relax. Sitting on a chair means you do not have to tuck your legs under you the whole time. As these hu chairs and little folding beds became popular, people's sitting posture in the Central Plains also began to change. It shifted from strict kneeling to sitting cross-legged, and then further to sitting with feet on the ground and the back leaning against the chair. This way of sitting fit the body better. Many people tried it once and thought, this is actually quite nice. After that, it was hard for them to go back to kneeling for a whole day. On a mat. The change in posture caused debate. By the time of the Liu Song dynasty in the south, the court actually had a serious argument about kneeling to eat versus sitting loosely to eat. Some guardians of tradition firmly opposed relaxed, sprawling postures at the table. They saw that as irreverent and rude, and wanted to keep formal kneeling and raise this issue to the level of defending traditional culture. But in real life, the body always has its own feelings. When most people felt that long periods of kneeling made their legs numb and their backs ache, more and more of them began, quietly, to adopt more comfortable ways of sitting. And once that spread widely enough, the force of tradition weakened. Once posture changes, the table must also change. Going from kneeling to sitting cross-legged to sitting on chairs lifts the body higher and higher. The table has to rise with you. The little table in front of one person gradually gets longer legs and finally turns into something like the tables we know today. At that point, one person, one table starts to feel impractical. By the Tang dynasty, Chinese people had basically completed the shifts from separate tables to shared tables. In other words, from one person per table to several people gathering around one table to eat. If you line up this scene with the famous painting along the river during the Qingming festival, it becomes quite interesting. In that painting, there are many scenes of people eating. A lot of people sit around big tables together. The atmosphere is lively and crowded. If you look at an earlier work, The Night Revels of Han Zizai, the images feel like a middle stage. Some parts show one person per table. Other parts show several people sharing one table. Postures are also mixed. Some people are using chairs, others are still on mats with folded legs. This blended picture itself tells you that, at that time, people were right in the middle of moving from old habits to new ones. By the Ming and Qing dynasties, sitting on chairs around square or round tables was already very close to our modern way of eating. Looking back from there at the restaurants, tea houses, and street stalls and along the river during the Qingming festival, you can see that shared table dining had become the norm. Changes in posture, in tables, and in eating style are not just changes in daily habits. They also reflect changes in cultural thinking. The earliest separate portions stressed fair distribution, one person, one share, and no one could take someone else's food. Later, separate tables wrapped in rituals stressed rank and rules. When steppe and farming cultures clashed and blended, when chairs and hubeds appeared, people began to look for a balance between ritual and comfort. Later on, shared tables appeared. People gathered around one table, dishes placed in the center, chopsticks reaching in from every side. The focus was no longer one person, one table, but eating together. Behind this eating style, there is also an idea of being together and sharing one table. So next time you watch a costume drama and see characters kneeling alone in front of a little table, quietly eating, you can stretch the timeline out in your mind. From separate portions in very early societies, to the highly ritualized banquets of Zhou nobles, to Mencius in the warring states obsessing over posture, to the northern riders of the 6 dynasties bringing in raised chairs, to the big, busy banquet tables of the Thames, to the mixed images in the night revels of Hansa Zai and along the river during the Qingming festival. And finally, to the round table in your own home today, with everyone sitting together for a meal. The food is still one bite of rice, one bite of vegetables, but behind it are thousands of years of changes in posture and thought. From kneeling to eat, to sitting cross-legged, to sitting on chairs, from one person per table to many people at one table. There are body feelings, there is the weight of ritual, and there is the blending of different peoples and ways of life. When you next look at your own dining table, you may suddenly feel that it is not just a piece of furniture. It is a way of living that many generations have slowly shifted into place.
Sky in light, Nua healed the broken heart. Fuxi traced the world's design. Every age leaves stories bright. Yaya dynasty shaped bronze. Shang dynasty cast Qin dynasty forged the great walls. Han dynasty opened Silk Road winds. 3 Kingdoms dynasty turned war to tales. Zheng dynasty led ink and mountains bloom. Sui dynasty carved the Grand Canal. Tang dynasty Song dynasty raised learning's flame. Yuan dynasty swept the northern plains. Ming dynasty strengthened walls again. Qing dynasty closed an ancient end. Leave stories bright. History and myth ignite in endless light. China's history moves in mystery through the night. Footsteps of this land enchant the world in light. Kingdoms dynasty turn war to tales. Qin dynasty Song dynasty raise. Learn